Welcome to Perspectives in Mobile, the news podcast from the Mobile Ecosystem Forum. Join us discussing the world of telecommunications, technology, and mobile innovations.
New episode of MEV podcast series Perspective, in which experts and industry leaders talk about what they think, see, and expect in the world of technology, telecommunications, and innovative mobile services. I am Riccardo Amati. What are the new developments in defense artificial intelligence? Is AI friend or foe of security? If ever a man can have this answer, this man is Bradley Boyd, who joins me in this podcast from California. Welcome, Brad.
Hi, Rick. Great to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Retired Colonel Boyd is a former Marine. He's a current AI strategist and a leading thinker in the integration of tech and the U.S. national security. He's a visiting fellow at Stanford's Hoover Institution, and he teaches at Stanford International Politics. Brad, Colonel, the invasion of Ukraine has prompted militaries to update their arsenals. What are the new developments and happenings?
First, it's great to be on here. Thanks for having me, Rick. It's really an honor to talk to you and your audience. Let me first specify that I don't have any special knowledge of Ukraine. I have not been there participating in the conflict myself, but I've observed, just like I'm sure many of your informed listeners have observed, what's going on in Ukraine. And certainly we're seeing a couple different things. We're seeing the way that emerging technology can affect the battlefield, and it sometimes have an amazingly positive effect. But we're also seeing the way that some traditional technologies that oftentimes were pushed aside in the last several years have reemerged as seeing the types of effect they can bring onto the battlefield. And when I say that, I mean specifically artillery, armored vehicles. And we see that how those things are used in response to emerging technology is really important as opposed to just being the technology itself. So, for example, tanks are very vulnerable to small suicide drones or some other things, precision artillery and so forth, but tanks can be used in combination with those items to achieve some great effects on the battlefield. So once again, we're sort of seeing things that we already knew, and that is one particular technology or asset doesn't do particularly well on the battlefield unless coupled with several other technologies and assets, which helps exploit strengths and protect and mitigate against weaknesses.
But anyway, there are AI-enabled weapons being already tested, and as you were saying, they are not hyper technology stuff. I mean, basically, am I correct in saying that what the military needs today in a field like the one we are seeing in Ukraine is a lot of small little stuff working together, and being lethal? Of course, we are talking about war.
Yeah, I mean, so you have to be careful how you look at this. So when you see things like a drone, let's say even a remotely piloted drone or a loitering munition, what you have to understand is that, yes, there's some AI-enabled capability in there, but it's really about the network of systems and processes that support that drone getting to the target. And this is what most people aren't talking about on the media side, but what you'll see on the operational side is that in order to conduct a strike, even with a semi-autonomous drone or a loitering munition, many things have to be in place to get there. A targeting process has to be in place that involves people and maybe some AI-enabled capability. You have to have networks in place, radio systems in place. You have to have spotters on the ground. You have to have things that do the battle damage assessment. So what you're really looking at is a system that has many pieces of automated technology that may be AI-enabled, but you're also looking at many sort of legacy systems where we're talking about radio equipment, video equipment, satellite equipment, that allows sort of this individual technology to work. And I think the mistake is to think that the drone itself can do it all by itself, when actually you need a very robust operations and intelligence system that allows that capability to actually be maximized.
And you need human intelligence.
Yes.
Right. So if I understand where the future doesn't see exactly lethal autonomous weapons, as the main force of an army. Big question is, of course, we are talking about war, we are talking about defense, we are talking about human lives. And do you think that in the future this technology would allow? Would you expect less KIA or more?
That's difficult to forecast. I mean, I think so. When you're talking about things like the nature and the character of war, so if I can be a little philosophical with you for a moment, the nature of war is unchanging. When I talk about the nature of war, war is inherently violent. It is killing. It is chaos. It is destruction. No particular weapon system is going to change the nature of war. However, these weapon systems will change the character of war. At one time we fought with swords and arrows, and then we fought with tanks and airplanes, and now drones and possibly autonomous systems. So that character is going to change how we fight the war. But I think it's unrealistic to expect that a particular weapon system is somehow going to reduce the amount of killing. I find that unlikely. Certainly, precision allows us to be more efficient about how we conduct warfare and, frankly, how we kill on the battlefield. But war is inherently chaotic, and there's not going to be a system, regardless of how sophisticated it is, that doesn't make mistakes. Mistakes will occur, and people who probably shouldn't have been killed will be killed. That is the nature of war.
Right. Well, just a very stupid question, but what's the more terrifying AI-enabled weapon the humans are working at? I mean, if I ask you to imagine the worst possible outcome of this technology applied to defense, and I mean in negative in this case.
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of times people want to think of a weapon that just kills indiscriminately. I mean, we could do that now. We could have done that 50 years ago. You could have hooked up a machine gun to a sensing system that just kills anything that hits the sensor. I mean, that's essentially what a landmine does, right? It's an autonomous system that goes out there. You put it in the ground, somebody steps on it, it blows up. Fairly indiscriminate, other than having to trigger the amount of weight that it requires. So I think that no military wants an indiscriminate system like that. But where you do start to get into a little bit of danger is when you start to let automated systems touch things that have a high risk factor of the consequences if a mistake were to happen. And the most obvious example of that is in nuclear weapons. So if a nuclear armed state is integrating automated decision-making systems into its nuclear command and control systems, you have to really be careful with that. And I would say most states, including the United States, are fairly committed to not having automated decision-making systems inside nuclear command and control systems. But that doesn't mean that AI-enabled systems won't touch nuclear command and control. For example, computer vision, as far as tracking launch signatures and maintaining custody of assets in adversaries and so forth. That will all be aided by AI-enabled models and systems. And will that affect human decision-making? Yes, of course. But what we're really talking about avoiding is having a launch signal or a launch decision being made by any sort of automated system.
Right, but there will always be a chain of command made of humans.
Yeah, because the consequences of accidentally firing a nuclear weapon are just too severe, right? Accidentally firing a rifle is bad enough, but it's not going to destroy a city or start World War III, right? So.
Right. A very practical question, even cynical. Is emerging technology in defense like a new... how much money is devoted to it? And are startups, Silicon Valley going to capitalize? Did you see new company trying to capitalize on
Yeah, well,
that.
what's interesting about artificial intelligence as a field of technologies, and certainly got to understand that AI is not a single technology. It is many technologies, from natural language generation to computer vision. They are related, but these are different technologies. Um, but they are dual, what we call dual use technologies, meaning they have a significant civilian commercial application that can be used for defense applications. So when you see something like that, previously, nuclear weapons do not have a commercial application. Nuclear technology does, but not nuclear weapons. So there's only one consumer of nuclear weapons technology, and that's the government, as far at least in a nuclear equipped state. But for things like natural language generation, large language models, there's a massive commercial market for that. So those things are improving very, very quickly. And the government is not the developer. The government, the defense industry, is the uh, customer, not necessarily the lead developer. And so I think you're going to see, essentially hundreds of billions of dollars invested in this type of technology because of its commercial dual use ability.
What do you know of the initiative Replicator by the Pentagon? What is
Yeah,
it?
I mean, I have no special knowledge, but obviously, I've read the reports coming out from Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathleen Hicks, and essentially, what I can tell from it is that is about emphasizing the purchase of small attritable drones, possibly semi-autonomous, maybe autonomous drones, uh, to essentially be able to do what the Ukrainians are doing, and that is to strike targets or do ISR very cheaply, and to be able to adapt to conditions on the battlefield very quickly. So, what the U.S. government has a tendency to do is spend a lot of money on very sophisticated military equipment. And what she's trying to do is reorient and said, hey, there's a role for very cheap, unsophisticated equipment within our defense structure, using Ukraine as an example and saying, hey, we should probably do some of that. So I think Replicator is an initiative to try and get towards some of that low cost, attritable type stuff, off the shelf, not spending $100 million on development, just buy stuff that's already out there.
Going back to the amount of money which is going to be spent, do you have, I mean, do some industry researchers have, kind of an amount, possible amount?
No, I
Is
mean,
there a figure?
Replicator does not have any money budgeted for it, and from my understanding is they've specifically said that there's not going to be new budget for Replicator. What it is a program they're trying to get the services inside the Department of Defense to reallocate their own assets to fulfilling this sort of low cost, attritable um, type of systems. And I think that's going to be the problem, right? In without getting in too much detail, the way the U.S. military works is the individual services are appropriated money to man, train, and equip the forces that are used in the joint force. So all of the money that they have in their pocket is kind of already allocated to do certain things. And so it's a big ask to say, okay, Army or Navy, what we want you to do is take that money that you've allocated for all these things, and we want you to spend some of it on this Replicator initiative to get low cost attritable drones. Uh, Maybe they will, maybe they won't. And I think those negotiations are probably ongoing.
There is a big question mark about the security risks posed by generative AI. And I mean, not being an expert, I see it more dangerous, if possible, in the defense generative AI.
Yeah.
What's your comment?
So when you're talking about generative AI, we're talking about large language models or generating images or video or sound. There's a lot of different types of generative AI. Um, when you're looking at the security risk, the first thing that pops up, of course, is disinformation and misinformation and the ability to create content that is false or misleading and then flood the information space with that type of content. I think that's a very real security issue. Um, Not necessarily the defense industry's problem, but certainly they can have some influence there. But a lot of times that becomes sort of a political problem, at least in the United States and a law
Part
enforcement.
of the hybrid war, as they put it,
Yeah,
isn't it? Part of the hybrid.
Yeah, and in the United States, at least, we have a lot of rules that keep like the military separate from the civilian, the domestic side. A lot of very clear barriers. But other countries, namely China and so forth, don't have those kind of rules, so they can move back and forth in this gray area quite easily. As far as other types of security risk with generative, they're the way that the technology uses content, the way that it learns. One of the reasons why recently the US Department of Defense said, hey, we're not going to use any of these generative AI systems like OpenAI's ChatGPT or some of the others, is because if you allow your employees to start talking to those things, what they have a tendency to do is reveal secrets by interacting with the model. And those models ingest those things and compile those things so that you can actually learn what people inside the Department of Defense are thinking by interacting with the model. So that becomes a security risk. So DoD is not like saying we're not going to use generative AI.
Maybe it would become something like a spy, a whistleblower, that.
Yeah, there's an example from Samsung, if you want to look it up, that some Samsung engineers were asking, I think it was ChatGPT, to help them with some semiconductor design. And what happened was you could go into ChatGPT and ask about semiconductors, and some of the things that Samsung's engineers were asking it was creating viewpoints for others. And so I'm not sure you could quite reverse engineer what Samsung's engineers were doing, but you could learn things about what they were doing by interacting. So the government's trying to avoid that.
Of course, it would be a threat to national security. And much more in general, is emerging technology, AI, a foe of social stability? I mean, could it be used by I don't know, by gangs, by revolutionaries, or insurgents, or.
Sure. I mean, that's what's interesting the most to me about especially generative AI when you talk about large language models is large language models are basically an interface. And the reason that other types of generative AI like video and drawings and sound are becoming more powerful is because of the interface allowed by a large language model. And what I mean by that is you no longer have the expertise to write computer code or to Python, whatever, to make a program do something. You can just tell it in plain English through the large language model what you want it to do, and it will do it. For example, go on ChatGPT or some similar large language model and have it write some code for you to do something. Just tell it, write me some code in Python to um, do some widget on your computer. I can't think of one off the top of my head, and it will write the code for you, and it's pretty good. You can just cut and paste that code into GitHub or whatever and start doing your basically stuff that you have no business doing because you have no training. So what does that mean? Terrorists, gangs, whatever, if they want to write malicious code, they can do that, even if they don't know how to write that type of code. Or if they, the most scary one now is with synthetic biology and biosecurity, is you can have it help you write um, essentially the framework to develop more lethal pathogens. And there's a lot of work being done right now to figure out how to limit that. But if you've got someone who has no training and they want to figure out how to make coronavirus more persistent or more deadly, these language models theoretically can help them do that. So what we're seeing is a democratization of malicious behavior. It is more easy for unskilled malicious actors to do malicious things.
Democratization of malicious behavior is something that sounds very scary. And all that could be done with mobile phones, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to get, um, there's no large language model that's sitting on your mobile phone. It all has to be done over a network system right now, right? You can't, they're not small enough yet to just get on one of your mobile devices, but eventually they probably will be. But yeah, you could theoretically get, ChatGPT as a mobile version of it that you can get on there and it talks over your network to ChatGPT, and you could definitely do that. Yeah.
Is China still far away compared to. I mean, I've read that they have developed AI in defense since. I mean, they've been doing it for years, and probably they are ahead. For how long they will be?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's clear that China is ahead of anyone. I think that they're putting a lot of money into development, and they certainly are scaling more quickly. What China does well is scale capability, but I don't think they're ahead insofar as new capability. For example, they were behind on large language models, right? They were caught a little bit by surprise there. But their ability to scale those systems once developed probably exceeds ours simply because the way that they have their commercial and military interaction is much simpler. So I'm not afraid of them.
The way they do things in general.
Yeah, and they certainly can bring a lot of mass. They have a lot of people for data labeling, for example, for supervised learning AI systems, and they certainly have, a lot of mass when it comes to computer systems and just chips and things like that. They critical minerals. You get to this. They are going to have an advantage in scaling up any technology that they develop. But at the same time, there's a debate on whether scale is the way to go as far as like building bigger and bigger models and requiring more and more data. There's a school of thought that if we keep piling on the data, increasing the size of the models, that their performance will increase. But there's also another school of thought that says basically, hey, is the more that we need to come up basically with a new technology, that we need to change how we're doing the sophistication of the models, because in order to get to the next step, we have to have a new technology as opposed to just piling on more and more data and more compute. And I tend to be in that camp. I think that we'll continue to see improvement with the sort of increasing the size of the models and the amount of data. There's some benefit there, but I think ultimately to get to some of the really new things that people want to do, we're going to need an evolution in the technology itself.
So more than larger scale new technology, that's the future on your opinion.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're trying to get to artificial general intelligence, the other big argument is, hey, do we just keep making bigger large language models and eventually we'll hit AGI? And I don't think so. I think that to get to like things like AGI, you would need a different technology that some others are working on. And I tend to be in that camp. And in fact, someone asked me this question about, 5 or 6 years ago. And I was like, hey, I think we're bumping up. Even 5 or 6 years ago, I was like, I think we're starting to bump up on the limits of deep learning as an AI technology and some of these other things that we're going to have to come up with. What's the next thing? Learning with smaller amounts of data. And there's a lot of work being done there. I don't know when that's going to come through. But I think that, yeah, we're sort of hitting the limits with our current technology.
Bradley Boyd, AI strategist, visiting fellow at Stanford's Hoover Institution. He teaches international politics at Stanford. And thank you very much for sharing your thoughts about AI in defense, Brad. Thank you, Colonel. That's all for this episode of Perspectives, the math podcast in which experts and leaders talk about the world of technology, telecommunications, and innovative services. Till the next episode, from Riccardo Amati, goodbye and good luck with your work.
All right. Thanks. Great to be here. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thanks for listening to Perspectives in Mobile. Join us next as we explore telecoms, technology, and mobile innovations. Stay tuned, stay connected, and let's unlock the mobile potential together.